You are now listening to Redbeard Talks Redbirds, your home for all things Cardinals baseball. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Redbeard Talks Redbirds, and we've got a very special guest on today with a new book. This is Paul Hembo, and I'm going to let you say your last name because that's a tricky one. Co-author of Got Your Answers. How's it going?
I'm Paul Hembekide. You can call me Hembo for the next half an hour. It's great to be here. I want to talk a little bit about my book, but obviously I want to talk a lot about baseball because that obviously is what's most passionate to you and what's most passionate to me.
That's the focus, man. But we're talking sports, and your book covers like every sport imaginable, starting with the Olympics and all American sports and hockey and soccer and gymnastics and everything. And it's incredible. And honestly, it's been a lot of fun to read so far. How much fun was it to put together?
A lot. Labor of love, I would describe it. That literally thousands of hours of research to be able to hold this little $15 book in my hand. But like, I'm more than happy to provide you the pitch, but I don't want to do an infomercial or be a salesman. So I want to ask you. You read the book. You're the consumer. You who we wrote this for. What did you like? What didn't you like when you first picked it up? What was it like to sort of flip through these pages, look at these lists, read the essays as a sports fan? You're our median audience. You're our reader. You're the person that we wrote this for, just like sports fans like us. So I don't need to sell the
Yes.
book to you. I'm already on talking with you. I want you to tell your audience how much you liked it and how much you didn't.
Well, I'm honestly still reading it. I'm about halfway through at this point, but I'm having a blast reading it. This strikes me as a long form conversation at a sports bar with someone you've never met, just talking about all the different things, but with more research put into it, like you said. And it's
That's
just it covers everything, but so well. I mean, you're talking about the best athlete between sports. You're talking about the best quarterback. You're talking about the best team. You're talking about the best dynasty. It's incredible all the different things you've woven in and the details you put into some of your decisions. I mean, I know that there's a mixture between Greeny and yourself, putting in, okay, this is maybe more based on research, this is more based on feeling and some of the dynamics behind the history of the sports and the timing and everything that go together. But it was just a lot of fun going through all that. I love that
Oh,
stuff.
that's wonderful to hear you say. Most of the feedback we've received has been pretty similar. I'll give you the elevator pitch on how we put it together. So I put together, I don't know, somewhere between 150 and 200 possible lists for us to explore, and then we pared it down to 100, as you might expect. And then I kind of went into the lab, this this research dungeon that I live in practically, and most of these are top 10 lists. So I put together for most all of these 100 lists somewhere between 15, 20, in some cases, even more than 20 options for us to basically have 100 debates over. And so everyone seems to ask Greeny and me, like, well, where are the areas for which you most disagreed? And it's a fine question. It's just not the right question because we sort of allowed, in some cases, the data to do the deciding for us, and in other cases, the persuasion. So our aggregation, in most cases, these top tens are the product of he and I literally having 100 sports debates amongst ourselves. And obviously, that's far too long to put in a book. That's a long form podcast that no one would listen to. But the book itself is based upon literally thousands of hours of my research, hundreds of hours of he and I arguing about the best way to stack each of these things. And candidly, we agonized over it. But that's the whole freaking point. Like you said, if you're at a bar and you run into another sports fan and you guys hit it off, you're having so many of these arguments the same way that Greeny and I did. We just put pen to paper. That's the only difference.
That's right. A little bit more time, a little bit more energy, and some actual data to back it up instead of just what
And
you
a little less
remember.
alcohol in most cases.
In most cases, yes. I love that. Um, so how did the idea for these books come? I mean, we haven't even mentioned the fact that this is basically a sequel to the other book, which was Got Your Numbers, correct?
Got your number. That's right.
And so that one was a little bit more strictly data driven, and this one was more opinions and things of that sort. Is that right?
That's about right. So, got your number, 100 chapters, 5 to 700 word essays. Who owns every number in sports, 1 through 100? I thought it was magnificent myself. But what we learned from our readers was that they were kind of into sports history and really into sports debate. And so, what Greeny and I want to do is listen to our reader, listen to our listeners, and give them a book about sports debate. And so that's why we sort of majored in this short form list format, short blurby, flippy, the perfect book when you're taking a bleep. That's kind of the way that we view this book. Like that's the not that you can't like it if you're not like the ultimate sports bro, but that's kind of the idea. We wrote the book for sports fans just like us because so many of these questions you've thought about yourself, so many of these debates you've had amongst yourself and others. And what we decided was the sports debate culture that we live in right now is overrepresented in the media and underrepresented in book form. And so ultimately, what we wanted to do was super serve that audience, and that's sort of where we landed and why we landed there.
That is a really interesting point. I like that. I love that.
I mean, we embrace debate. Like that's the whole, like our whole sports commentariat lives in that world. But we really haven't translated that much to the world of print. And Greeny and I recognize an opportunity for that to live in pages. And when blended with sports history, we at least like to think we've created the first or at least the best thing of its kind.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of the last ones that I was looking at, I believe it was the biggest sports debates over the last 30 years or something to that effect.
Yes.
And that one I find very interesting. I think personally about the college football playoff and how
Okay.
it has in some ways taken some of the conversation and debate out of it,
Mm-hmm.
but in other ways it's actually made it bigger and expanded it to even more conversation, more teams and more arguments. So that was one of the first things that I thought of when I looked at that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna chapter excuse me, page number 133 in your hymnals for those following at home. Yeah, what are the top 10 sports talk topics of the last 30 years? Last 30 years is Greeny's tenure as a sports talk radio host. This is a fascinating one. So number 6 on this list, the expansion of the college football playoff, highly controversial. Now it's been expanded. It remains controversial. I think
Right.
you've about identified my standpoint on this thing. Like the idea that expanding the playoff is going to create less controversy, I've always found foolish. I mean, literally, we will have people that have never seen Syracuse or Drexel play basketball arguing on March 20th whether or not they should be the first team in or the last team out. So the idea that you wouldn't be arguing over who should be 11 and who should be 13 is obviously foolish. And so I think we will find that the college football playoff expansion will only further drive sports talk debate in the world of college football.
Okay, I got one for you. Baseball playoffs being expanded. For me, what I've traditionally said is it in some ways cheapens the longest season in sports. It makes the 162 games a little bit less meaningful. Now, I'm not sure that's actually the case, but what are your thoughts on that immediately?
I think that you're 100% right, and I think that argument is 30 years old. Once the Major League Baseball decided to go to 4 teams with a wild card in 1995 coming off the player strike, that argument ceased and desisted. Now we're at a place where 12 teams make the playoffs, previously at a place where 10 teams made the playoffs. So baseball decided in 1995 that it was a regular season plus tournament. And so what we're doing now, what we're playing now, literally as we speak, is a baseball tournament at the end of the season. And like you could definitely argue that it cheapens the regular season. You could also argue that it's a better way to entertain the masses, and it most definitely is that. More playoff games, more nationally televised games, higher profile games, the best teams, the best players. And so, on one hand, do I yearn for the days of the 162 spitting out a pennant winner in both leagues? Sure, but then that's also living in a world in which so many games are meaningless, entirely meaningless, up until the very last day of the regular season, literally the last day, Monday, the doubleheader, Mets Braves. That game mattered a lot. Whereas if we had a team from each league or 2 teams from each league coming out, when the sixth and eighth best teams are playing each other in the middle of September, the game has no meaning at all as it relates to the postseason. And so I think you're right. It definitely cheapens the regular season. The thing I wouldn't say for sure is whether or not that's a pejorative, whether that's a negative, or whether this is just the world we live in now, so we shouldn't howl at the moon.
Well, and to the point that you're making, you've got almost half the teams making the playoffs and probably at least half the teams right there close sniffing the playoffs. And so, as you said, every game down to the end almost means something.
That's right. My personal opinion is that the right sized playoff field for baseball is 8, but we're just never going back.
No, you're right. You're 100% right with that. So, how did you guys come up with the idea to write these books? I believe y'all kind of stumbled upon it, or was it just through your own conversations and arguments?
So, book number 1 was spawned in the throes of COVID. I'm talking like April or May of 2020, when at least here in the Northeast, we're all basically locked in our houses.
Yeah.
Greeny was having a conversation with some people that work on our TV show, and it just sort of spawned the idea in his mind. He had some more free time with his kids going to school, becoming an empty nester, and decided this was worth a shot with some of the free time that we were inevitably going to have. And so some things come just super organically like that. I mean, I've been doing research on his shows for nearly 10 years now. I think he recognized and that to capitalize on that beyond what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. He's also a brilliant writer who has done many books before and wanted a partner to write some nonfiction stuff, some sports stuff. And so it was honestly as simple and as honest and as easy as that. There was never the plan to do more than one book, but the public seemed to like the first one so much that a sequel sort of just became inevitable. Like I told you, when we decided that sports history plus sports debate is a place that we wanted to go. If the appetite's there, we're going to do the best that we can to serve you.
Yeah, 100%. So, one thing that I was struck by is your number one answer on all of your lists. You do a really good summary of the reason that that is the number one, or the impact that that player or that situation had. I really enjoyed reading that. I guess the only critique I would have there is I would love to see more on some of the others in the list as well, but the book can only be so big.
Right. So the book would naturally be 10 times as long. The
Right.
idea here wasn't to the idea here wasn't to provide an exposition or expository. The idea here was to show the back of the napkin, to show our work. And so
Yeah.
you can't like the idea if you're going to debate between numbers 6 and 8 in every single chapter would obviously just get unwieldy. The thing that people care about is the list, what's the top 10, and why are you number one? And in the
Yeah.
end, in order to write a sort of digestible book, which is what we wanted. We wanted a cheap book that was easy to burn through, that was very stimulating, and we've done that. You can't really do that if you're going to write, we'll say, 2,000 words for 100 different chapters. It's just not on the list of options. And so I totally feel your pain. It's a
Yeah.
comment that I've heard from more than one person, but ultimately that's a better, like, the audience is better served in some kind of podcast or something of that nature, when these things can be discussed in that format. I told you I thought, for the purposes of print, we've kind of nailed it. In order to go through an entire top
Yeah.
10 and argue about the merits between Larry Little and Cliff Harris for who's the better undrafted player, that would get very unwieldy for the median reader, which you of course are not. I mean, you're a sports expert. You're hosting me on your sports podcast, and that's why I understand where you're coming from. But it's probably a non-standard opinion based on your extraordinary knowledge base in relation to the average reader.
I'd say that's fair, and you're right. Putting it in a more digestible format for the larger audience, let's say it that way.
Yeah,
That's a good way to do it.
sure.
I did find it very, very fun and entertaining. Can you tell us maybe some of your favorite topics in the book?
Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah, most definitely yes. So I think my favorite topics in the book, without being too specific, are the ones that combine all of the sports, or at least the four major sports. So that's, to me, something that's very unique about this thing that most books haven't done. Like when you're comparing dynasties across eras, across sports, that's really hard. Like how do you put the Celtics of the 60s on a list with Joe Torre's Yankees? Well, we figured out a way to do it. So chapter 2 in our book, literally chapter 2, what are the top 10 dynasties in major sports history? This will be a good proxy for what I'm getting at. So
Yes.
how on earth are you supposed to compare the Steel Curtain to Steph Curry's Warriors? Well, you could do it objectively. You can do it using the data to drive the decision. And so what I did, basically, in extremely short form, was take a look at how much high level winning you did over what period of time, and what was the competition like at the time in terms of not only the quality of the leagues, but the number of teams in the league. So, of course, the Warriors winning 4 titles between 2015 and 22 is an extraordinary achievement when considering the fact that it's a 30-team NBA. Whereas, of course, when Bill Russell Celtics won 11 championships over a 13-season span, there was either 12 or 14 teams in the league the whole time. Now, spoiler
Yes.
alert, we still consider Bill Russell's Celtics to be number one. However, each of those data points was used in spitting out this list. And so, in a roundabout way of answering that question, my favorite lists in the book are the ones for which there are 4 sports represented in the top 10. That's probably the safest, most straightforward way to answer that question.
I kind of agree with you. I had similar thoughts on that.
Okay.
I did find that very enjoyable because, like we talked about, you're taking into account literally the data, the wins, the losses, the championships. You're talking about the time, as you mentioned, the league and how
Yeah.
competitive it is, and then also what's going on within the country, the world, or the different sports at that time. And it it's impossible to measure the impact of all those things appropriately. And that's why this is fun to talk about and argue about. And I love it.
That's the good stuff. I'll give you another one. What are the top 7 Game 7 performances? Chapter 18, page 41 in your hymnal. So I think this is a fascinating concept because what we're able to do here is pit every individual Game 7 performance against each other across sports. So, like, literally, you're getting Bill Mazeroski hitting the walk-off home run to win the 1960 World Series in the same list as LeBron James' chase down block off Andre Iguodala in Game 7 of the 2016 NBA Finals. Like, no one's done that, at least not to my knowledge. And that's why, like, those lists are so fun because it required me to literally have 4 times the bandwidth and aggregating all of the options, and then requires Greeny and I to somehow, like, cogently aggregate all this stuff and persuade each other that somehow we can do this honestly. And I think we did.
I would love to be a fly on the wall for some of those conversations, honestly. I know they're done and over, but that sounds like so much fun. Can you tell me some topics that you thought about, you went through this exercise with, and maybe it got chopped from the book?
That's a great question. Topics that got chopped from the book. Okay, I'll give you a straightforward option. So people have commented that they've been a little bit surprised that we don't have things like who are the 10 greatest players in the history of the NBA? Who are the 10 greatest quarterbacks of all time?
Those
And
seem like easier things to go through.
Correct. But what I didn't want to do was major in what everyone else does. Anyone can put together a list of who the 10 greatest basketball players of all time are, or who the 10 greatest quarterbacks of all time are. The point here is that I wanted to be original. I wanted to be nuanced. I wanted to be contextualized. And so those kinds of lists, while eminently popular, while everyone has an opinion, to me aren't that interesting because they're so popular and everyone has an opinion. Like, the idea that we've ranked Game 7s across the 4 major sports is interesting and different and unique and nuanced. Whereas some of the more general lists, honestly, just open ourselves up to more nonsense. You know, the idea of, like, putting Michael Jordan 1 and LeBron James 2 on a list is the most overused conversation of all time. And so, like, the idea that we were going to do that, to me, was not beneath me, but beneath us. Candidly, I felt that it was doing our readers a disservice, an injustice, to be that milquetoast, that cliche, that overused, because we have the brain power, the capacity, the ability to do great and mighty things. And that's why we chose not to sort of lowest common denominator it, for lack of a much better term.
Well, and let's have more fun with it. Let's make it a little crazier and try to figure out who the hell lands #1 on this. I love that.
That's what makes our book great, in my opinion, is that it's not just the same regurgitated lists and sports debate topics. There are plenty of those that exist. But what I always wanted to do was consider the next step, the further nuance, the more specific context. I think we, at least for the most part, got that right.
Absolutely. I love it. Again, guys, the name of the book is Got Your Answers. Got Hembo here going through it. I love some of the insight with all this. Has this thing come out yet, or is it just about to come out?
So we're recording this on October the 1st, which is a Tuesday. The book came out on Tuesday, September the 24th. So you are talking to me on the 1-week anniversary of our big release.
Awesome. I love it. Congratulations. And can we look forward to more along this line?
I'm not at liberty to give any detail, but I can confidently say that this will not be the last thing of its kind that you will have the opportunity to read. How about that?
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on, for talking about this. And I'm ready to see the next one. So, I mean,
well, it sounds like you still have the second half of this one to read, but I very much appreciate your time. I very much appreciate your platform. I'm a Phillies fan. You're obviously a Cardinals fan. And I suppose we can still see eye to eye, although I will say the 2011 National League Division Series is still one of the most painful moments of my sporting life. And for that, I will never forgive you or any of your brethren.
Hey, look, I got some of those myself, and we can both agree on Ryan Howard. How about that?
Yes, of course. I mean, yes, all of the long-suffering Cardinals fans, God forbid.
Hey, you got some fun coming up this October, so I think you'll enjoy it.
Yes, sir. Oh, thanks for having me, buddy. Appreciate it very much.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Hembo. Hey, y'all. Thank you so much once again for joining us for this episode of Redbeard Talks Redbirds podcast. Make sure you go over there, hit like and subscribe for this channel. And don't forget to hit that notification button. Make sure you don't miss the next episode. Let's go, Cardinals.